Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over at Twitch at twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu. Today, I'm with my co-host Teddy, and we're going to be talking about some meta developments in the BT12 Ultimate Cup and how things are moving along with the idea of what makes a deck good or even playable to begin with when you're preparing for events and looking at the meta in a greater scheme. So as far as the meta developments go, I know Ultimate Cup from Top Cut just happened. We don't exactly have the full data set for that, but we do have a tiny bit. I was able to scrape together a semblance of a top 8, except it really wasn't. It was just some parts and pieces into top 16. So as far as what won the Ultimate Cup, it was Machine Dramon. Don't know what got in second place, but third was Beelzemon. Fifth was a Beelzemon. Sixth was a Dorpic OTK. Seventh was an All Force. Then we jump all the way down to 15th was a Machine Dramon. And then 16th was a D-Reaper, actually. So that's a little bit on the surprising side that a D-Reaper was able to make it in.
That is actually very interesting. I wonder how to look at that. I hope that list comes up because I would very much like to see that.
It'll eventually get up on Eggman's website, which is usually where I pull all of the top 16 data sets from.
Yeah.
And then before we get into BT12, like competitive BT12, because there was a UK event that happened. They had a regional and an Ultimate Cup. Let's talk about the Ultimate Cup first because that's the major topic at hand. So as far as their top 16 breakdown, I'm not going to say I'm shocked by any of this. Number 1 was All Force. Number 2 was All Force. Number 3 was a Black War Greymon specifically using Ragna. Then we have number 4, which is Red Hybrids. Number 5 is a War Greymon, again, specifically using Ragna. Then we have another Machine Dramon, then another Machine Dramon, a Bloomlord, Machine Dramon, Bloomlord, Beelzemon, Blue Hybrids. That's a little bit more of a surprise, but I don't think it's that big of a surprise, considering the format that we're in. Then Beelzemon, Machine Dramon, Yellow Hybrids, and Bloomlord. So that was the top 16. And then as far as new decks entering top 16 compared to what we had in terms of data sets with Latin America, I think only 3 new decks made it in. Actually 4, I lied. So there's Yellow Hybrids, Blue Hybrids, and then Black War Greymon and War Greymon. So those are the only new decks to enter in. So there's 9 playable decks. I guess technically 10 because D-Reaper's topped, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, and Dorpic also topped. So we have currently 11 playable decks as far as what you would think about picking for Ultimate Cup. Which
honestly isn't bad.
No, for only 2.5 events. I'm only saying half because we don't have the other half of what actually topped in Top Cut. For 2.5 events, that's not terrible.
No, I think it's pretty good. I mean, hopefully, we see a little bit shifts to, or this stays this way, this trend of multiple decks being usable. And I hope that stays. That's the way, but we know how the NA players get down, so it's very likely they'll shift to something, and then that'll be the deck that most likely will stay doing good.
Yeah, we'll see. And we already covered this multiple times. Like, if you want a good read and prediction on what would be good for monocolor Ultimate Cup format, you just take whatever was doing well competitively, stuff that can be dumbed down or already is just monocolor, And then there it is. Like you have your base and foundation, which is just what a lot of people already did, which again is why we're seeing the same decks top, even though they're restricted to one color.
Ooh, I like this blue hybrid list. It's pretty standard, but there's two cards that are pretty cool that I like a lot. I really like this Thomas. Putting Thomas Norton in so that you could swing multiple times with Mirage. I like that a lot. Nothing
I
crazy there.
Thomas, I always thought was a pretty decent card because in blue hybrids, you're just playing hybrids anyway. So, like, you just hard play it and it draws you a card. And then if it makes your level 6 that you're already playing anyway, just because it's one of the best level 6s that blue has generically, if it makes it better, sure, that's the upside. And then if you don't need it and Thomas is just sitting there, he's just a free tamer just to digivolve because you already got your value off of it. So I definitely do like the spice.
I like it a lot. I really like it. That, and then it's using Calamaraman as a one-off, which is weird, but I
They're
I dig
also,
it.
yeah, they're also using a more jamming centric package, I think, just because
This
they
is what I
also have
leaned
the
into.
kendo and the koji.
That's what I've been using recently with my blue hybrid list. This is pretty much the exact same, except
Yeah, because whether you're using Lanamon or Kendo, you're going to be giving ideally your Beowulf jamming, so that way it just makes it safe to swing with your Beowulf. And if you could even extend that to Mirage, then you're just hardcore plussing from there.
yeah, with Mirage plus Thomas, if you're able to get to that point, that's pretty strong. To be able to swing multiple times with jamming. Yeah, but a big up. But I do like this looks concise. I like all this.
Yeah, I mean
There's nothing
everything
really.
everything in this deck list makes sense, which is why I think it did so well. It went 4-2. They only had what 6 rounds? They had 80 players, and it was 6 rounds.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think there must have been some ties that might have affected things mid to late stages of that event. Not 100% sure, but regardless,
Yeah.
um, it is kind of interesting. I think like the big highlight that we even saw in this Ultimate Cup is Ragnar Lordmon specifically. For whatever
Ooh.
reason, it seems like Machine Dramon, War Greymon, and Black War Greymon all are in love with Ragnar Lordmon as a good alternative win condition. And I think it makes sense because of the fact that those bodies are already insanely hard to kill. And if you just throw in a Dorbrickmon, at least for Black War Greymon or War Greymon, or you just naturally build up into a second stack, because it's going to be so hard to get rid of your first stack with all of the protections, it just makes sense that it would be an easy card to slot in because it's already on color and it just auto wins you the game on the spot because your stacks are going to be so big.
Yeah, I mean, Machine Dramon is something. I mean, I've used the card a bunch of times, but in Wargrave, that's in Blackboard, that's really interesting. I mean, it makes sense, and it's another way to like against Machine Dramon take some of their sources out to try and nuke it before you go into the Ragna play to then evolve Ragna, nuke it again. So you could swing with like Raid, try and get a few sources off the Machine Dramon, because a lot of times it's the Machine Dramon or the Chaos Dramon, I should say, more often than not. The Chaos Dramon will just live with, one or two sources left because or it's usually one because it's five, so you take out two, four, and then you're left with your machine or your Wargrey suspended against his Chaos Dramon, which then he just evolves into Chaos X, clears your stack. But with the Dorbeck, it allows you to nuke it, and then Jogress, and then clap back instantly and trash like a bunch of security, 2 to 3 security instantly and swing. So it's like it makes sense. I like it a lot. I really, really think it's a cool concept, a cool idea, and well executed. Clearly, because these guys did really well
Yeah,
in
if
this
anyone's
tournament.
wondering, they both were on red base for Black War Greymon and War Greymon. So that's
Yeah,
something
you
to
have
take
to.
note of. Yeah, because the decks play two colors, so limiting them to one doesn't like harm the deck. But I think based on the tech and tools that they're working with, they definitely want to go more red because red gives you the X antibody Greymon that actually lets you have those protections. So you're like almost forced to go red. You could go black if you really wanted to, but you definitely are a lot more riskier if you are going black.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's I mean, you lose a lot of consistency without the red. I mean, since all your rookies and
Like you get better tamers, but you get worse everything else.
yeah, exactly. It's like the tamers. I don't think is really. I don't think you need the greatest tamers for this. I think that the bodies themselves do more than enough, and being able to use these things like that, it's just definitely better. I think red is just superior in this type of format at least. Uh, it just makes sense. More protections, more ways to keep your stack on board. That's really all that matters because in this deck, you just need to get the body. Once he's on board, have multiple protections, keep him on the board so that he's doing something always.
Yeah,
Uh,
and before we shift into the greater topic, we also do have from the UK a regionals with the ban and restrictions applied as of June 1st. So this is kind of like a little prelude into what we could kind of expect out of EX4 because I think we're both in the agreement that EX4 is not going to be changing that much. There is going to be a little bit of a shakeup because anytime there's new cards, obviously that's going to do something. But I don't think any of the decks are like overtly that much stronger than what they A already are or B what we already have. So as far as what won the UK regionals, it was Red Hybrids. Security Control took second. Red Hybrids took third. Hunters, Bloomlord, War Greymon, Machine Dramon, Hunters. Hey, there's a Dorbikmon that snuck in there. Hunters, Red Hybrid, Machine Dramon, Black War Hunters. So literally nothing we haven't already seen. It's just comparatively, the only thing that's like really absent is the
yeah,
Beelzebub. And I just think a lot of people in that event consciously chose not to play Beelzemon. Either that or the Beelzemons were just that much slower than some of the other decks, and it actually is impacting. We'll know more. It was definitely a large event at 226 players, so that's nothing to scoff at. Actually, maybe because it was on Limitless, could we see the metadata? So how
you
many
can. Yeah,
people? Yeah. So there was still a pretty high percentage of people playing Beelzemon. So, and it's not like Beelzemon was doing bad. It had about a 40% win rate compared to Hunters, which had about a 52%. Black War Greymon seemed to have a 47. Red Hybrids had a 55%. That's actually pretty good. But that's because Red Hybrids won, so that probably led and helped into that. But yeah, you could kind of see some of the basic data on like what people were playing. So it's not like people weren't playing Beelzemon. It was the third most represented deck. It just didn't do as well comparatively. So that definitely is something to take note of. The ban and limitation did slow it down, which did have an impact. I'm not saying it's a dead deck or it's bad just because of that. It's that it did help according to this one set of data.
it was like clearly we see that something happened. We'll see a little bit going forward whether or not it's the only reason that because could just be one singular like a deck. Like this could just be this for this specific tournament. It could change. We'll see. I don't know if it will. I still think Beelzemon's just fine. I don't see it being that bad, but we'll see. We'll have to see. I think I mean, we're going forward. We'll see more and how how it really did. If that limit really did hurt it that badly, which I don't think it did, but clearly, I mean, this is showing it has. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's going to be the only like data we have to go on going into EX4 because as we already mentioned last week, what I label as competitive BT12 is for the most part over. There
Um,
are no more regionals. It's all just Ultimate Cups from here on out until we hit EX4. Then we're going to have a little bit more regionals, and then we're going to be going into BT13. So things are moving fast, but that's just the nature of the EX sets. I really wish they would work on their scheduling with those. I understand their scheduling with them because they're actually on two different release cycles, and they just timed them poorly. So, or they just completely ignored the other products. But regardless, EX4 is an optional. It's a supplementary side product. So unless you really care about anything in there, I don't see a reason why you would like heavily invest in it.
yeah, I mean, unless you care about the alt arts and that, it's probably because the only real deck that gets anything really of substance is Blue Flare.
Yeah,
Maybe.
Blue Flare as of that set gets a good upgrade, and then there's going to be some Shine and Gao tools, which are
Oh
going to
yeah,
be more important in BT13, not so much in BT12, and then
but all that stuff is commons and uncommon, so that should be dirt cheap to
yeah,
get a hold.
because there is no level 6 for the Shine line in that set, and there is no level 6 for the Gao line. Their designed level 6 is actually supposed to be Zed, which is something. It's not great, but it's a card. It's just a cute filler card. And same thing with Victory Gray. So
I don't like that card at all. But
yeah, and then they did also release like they had a big release schedule announcement for the next couple of sets. So we do know when the next couple of sets are going to be coming out. I think they posted that on Facebook, but they also have that on their World's website as well. So I'm
yeah,
just going to be pulling that up real quick.
I think I posted it in the
Yeah,
Discord.
it's under products. So like if you go to their product page, so BT14 is going to be coming out in November. The reprint sets, Rising Wind. Oh, it's
September.
literally they actually changed the name to Resurgence Booster. Cool, good naming. I liked Rising Winds a little bit better. But Resurgence Booster is coming out in September. Then we have versus Royal Knights in July. And then in June, we have Alternative Beings, which is what's coming
Yeah,
up next.
yeah. I mean, I'm excited. One, I just liked all these sets. I'm very excited to play BT13 plus. I mean, we are getting it a little later than I'd like, but the resurgence booster. I'm gonna keep calling it Rising One because I like that more. But
I like that
uh,
more too.
uh, I we are getting this set really late, which sucks because I
I
think
mean, they
the
did
shelf
delay
life.
it. So they, to be fair, they did delay it because they weren't going to put
Oh yeah,
reprints in, which I was perfectly fine, 100% honest. I'm perfectly fine without the reprints. Um, and I think
just
they
fine.
were going to try to put those reprints somewhere else. We didn't give them the opportunity to say if they were, but the fact that everyone's expectations was it was going to be inside of the set, and then when we found out it wasn't, definitely caused some huge outlash, and Bandai walked that back. So it's cool that now they're all in there. I really hope the pull rates aren't garbage. Usually, the bigger the set, the worse the pull rates. Um,
Well, we know that there's a few things that aren't going to be there. Security rookie promo alt arts are not there because those are going to be in a different set going forward.
yeah.
We know there's another thing that's not going to be in there. I think the alt arts, the alt art memory boosts will not be in there either. So that takes away those. The two of the two 6 card sets, basically two 6 card sets or five, right? Yeah, there's 5 colors. Duh. 6 colors, 5 actual colors that like get mem boosts and things like that. So those cards are gone from there. So that's 10 cards total that will not be in the take the promo slot. So that gives us better chances to hit the promos that we'd rather hit and things like that. So I'm looking forward to this. I think this is good for newer players too.
No, it's
Um,
100% good for new players. So if anyone's unfamiliar with the Resurgence set in Japan, basically because we already have the whole set spoiled for us,
Yeah.
It was the greatest hits of Block Zero. So it picked some of the best cards from sets 1 through 5, which made up Block Zero. That was before they did the whole block signature thing. So it has a lot of good, important meta cards. And then it also has some filler cards because, they gotta give us filler just because we can't always have all the good stuff.
Oh yeah, we'll have our extra set of stuff there. I mean, I am looking forward to playing the Gamamon stuff and the Jellymon, especially my man Maple Leaf Bro over here. We got it on deck. I do kind of want to mess with that Angoramon deck or Simba, whatever his name is. Oh my god, I don't even
Simbra
remember.
Angormon.
Yeah, that's what his name
Yeah,
is.
it's the Angoramon based on the Angora Bunny, but anywho.
I like the art on that card, and I like the art of that line period. So
It does have some toppings in Japan, so it's not complete but. So there is hope.
all
Do I
three of them,
Yeah,
cool.
Dire Rabbitmon also is in that. Ghost Games was just such a fun show. I really wish that they wrapped it up better than they did. Because there definitely seems to be more of a plan, and then they just ran out of time and didn't execute on it properly, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, it was quite sad with it, but I mean, maybe next time. That's
Right.
unfortunate.
But we're definitely getting rising winds later than Japan did. So some of the Japanese data is skewed because they had rising winds before we did. If you're a person who hardcore follows religiously the Japanese data, it's just another instance that not all the time is Japanese data reliable.
Yeah, I mean, like we have to look at that with a grain of salt. Like our formats will always be different. We'll have different products. Players have different philosophies when it comes to deck building and things like that. So it's just you can't you can use it as a basis to see what is doing well over there, but you can't use it as the definitive. Oh, well, their best deck is only this, so that means it's going to be ours. No,
Yeah,
that's not
because
how it works.
in their EX4 meta, which is what we're going to be going into soon, they also had the Beelzemon Cups during that time. So a lot of the reported lists had a higher influx of Beelzemon, which made it look way worse than what it actually was. And their second best deck was Black War Greymon, also without the ban and restrictions to BT11 Greymon X Antibody. So, already just looking at the two best decks, the data is very skewed, and we're not on parity or par with it at all. But according to Japan, Blue Flares is pretty good with its updates. I think it does look pretty good, and I'm excited to at least test it out, see how good it actually is. Blue Flares always was kind of like mid meta anyway. It wasn't like hardcore stealing every single top event, but it popped up in tops every now and then. So that's definitely going to be good. And I think it's going to also be pretty good for Ultimate Cups also. Just as another anecdotal thing, just because it's all blue. So it's, as of right now, one of the better blue decks that you could play outside of blue hybrids and all force.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think blue is in a weird spot recently. I think we're on the back. Blue is on the back burner a lot of the time now in this, at least in this meta. Um,
Yeah, I'm okay with blue not always being the best because blue was very strong for a
Dominant
very
for a
long
long time.
period of time, and that's fine. Other people can, or other colors can come in and be good. Right now, more specifically, it seems like with the nerf, red and black is looking particularly strong as just a color combination, which puts us into wanting to lean towards Machine Dramon and Greymon, like red black Greymon. I don't know if people are going to lean towards Gaiomon in EX4 just because there actually is a Gaiomon in that set. In Japan, people were playing around with it. It's just literally another card to add into the Greymon deck that we already were running. So I think it'll definitely see some experimental play for both Ultimate Cups and for competitive.
I know I'm gonna mess with it because I really like the card. I think that Gaiamon's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um,
But I definitely think that those decks, at least for Ultimate Cup's sake, I they're just going to be running Ragnar Lordmon as like the big card to culminate the deck, act as the good win condition, and really propel the decks forward even farther than they normally would be. Which leads us into like the main topic on what actually defines a deck to be good. So I kind of have a couple of bullet points on what I think makes up a good deck. So my first bullet point is the deck's win condition, its goals and game plan. Those kind of all lump together into one. The second bullet point is the speed of the deck and its consistency. So how fast it moves and how easy it sees its pieces or how fast it sees its pieces. Then I have the protections that it has. So how it's interacting with the meta. And what it's doing to A, stop the opponent from interacting with you while you're still doing your game plan, and B, how well can you recover when your game plan goes wrong, if it even does. Then outside of that, I think like matchup data, like your deck's actual matchups comparatively to what other decks can do. I think that actually is a huge aspect because you could have a really good deck, but if it loses 100% of the time to the deck people are actually playing, but you win 100% of the time against everything else, is that deck still meta playable? So I definitely think matchups play a huge part into it. And then the last bullet point that I have is the flavor or style. So before I get into any of these more specifically, the flavor or style of the deck is basically just like its popularity is how I like to put it. Like, is the deck popular because the Digimon looks cool, or is the deck actually that good? Those are just a couple of bullet points before we dive deeper into them, into what I think makes up a good deck. What do you think makes up a good deck, Teddy?
so I had a few overlapping ones with yours, like consistency. How fast can your deck get to whatever it wants to do? What is your win condition? How does it affect your opponent? Is it doing removal? Is it doing controlling the board? Is it setting up a wall that your opponent can't get through? Is it killing your opponent outright? That those are two. They kind of lean in the same, essentially, consistency. How do I get to my win condition? Can I get to it faster than my opponent? They kind of all bleed together. Um, I think a deck to be good, it needs a way to be both defensive and aggressive, or it has to lean into one of those so oppressively, like so heavily that it just outright oppresses the opponent. Um, i.e., for example, Black or Gray did a bit of both, but the defense was so good that there was not much your opponent could do when it got there. I agree also with you said another one. I had another bullet point: protections. How is it keeping your opponent from doing what they want to do? When you get to your end piece, is it sticking? Is it able to stay on the board and continue to be a nuisance to your opponent? Um, I didn't have the flavor thing. That's very interesting because that does lead into what people want to play. Because if it's just some random Digimon that no one likes, they probably aren't going to really play it, or it'll people will play it if it's good, but it's not like when War Greymon's good. War Greymon's good. Everybody's playing that, or like that kind of thing. So, or in this for instance, for our meta, just so we can put it in our anecdotal state, Beelzebub. Beelzebub. Everybody loves Beelzebub, so of course it was, and it was easily accessible. That was another point for me. How accessible is your deck? Is it is it cheap? Is it easy to build? Do you have to go out of your way to get a bunch of different cards from multiple sets, or is it just cookie cutter? I can just get Beelzebub, for example, get two starter decks and then a few extra cards from here and there, and then boom, I'm good to go. Secret rares, all that other stuff, that matters to a good chunk of people. Because like decks like All Force for Ultimate Cup, for example, those are off a lot of people's radar just because Arena's expensive. and people don't want to throw the money for it. The people that will play it, of course, will throw the money, but there are that group of people that maybe I don't want to spend $200 for just 4 cards. So that was one of my points, because that, at least in my mind, that matters. Is it accessible? Is it easy to build? Like Hunters is easy. You just buy a box or two, a few, like 2 or 3 boxes of this set. You're golden. You're good to go. You can just immediately play Hunters out the gate. You might have to buy a superior mode or extra or a Quartzmon here and there, but other than that, you're good just from that. So, and if you didn't want to buy the boxes, you could just buy the cards outright. That's cheap. I think the biggest thing for me, though, is definitely consistency. Like, how can I get to my win condition more often than my opponent can? If the answer is yes, the deck is probably pretty good. If the answer is no, And then I guess the caveat also, is the win condition good? Is the win condition so good that it just outright wins you the game? Or is it just, oh, I got to my win condition like Bancho Mamemon, I played a guy and then I swing 2 checks. Is that winning me the game? Probably not. Like, so it's like your win condition has to be either obscenely absurd on the aggressive side, where it just outright kills your opponent, i.e. cards like Grandis, Beelzemon X, XY, whatever, fill in whatever card that you think is absurdly strong.
Yeah, Ultimate Cup, that's Ragnarlord.
Yeah, I guess in this case, they would lean to that. I think that's kind of where I am at with that. Those like 3 or 4 points, ideally. If they don't meet any of those, if I can't check those off, I'm probably not playing those decks, because they just don't fit into what I think a good deck is.
Yeah, and I think like in this format, it really kind of highlights a lot of these bullet points very well on what we define as a good deck, because we are definitely seeing a like power gap and power discrepancy between what actually is topping compared to what isn't topping. So like looking just at competitive BT12, we ended the format with like 13 playable decks, whereas at the end of BT11 competitive, there was 25 decks playable. So what happened to those, like literally half the entire meta just getting cut out because of BT12? And I honestly think it is just the sheer power discrepancy on how good these current set of decks are comparatively to everything else beforehand. So the first bullet point is the win con. We're not going to go like over deck by deck and describe everything, but like just the win con. Like I think some of these decks that we're currently playing have absolutely absurd win cons. Like just as a highlight, Machine Dramon, I know that's going to be like the big topic because we're in Ultimate Cups, and that's positioned to be the best deck of the format. Its win condition now is Ragnarlordmon. The format is slower. They took out a lot of the OTK-esque decks. They're still OTK decks, but they're definitely not as consistent and not as powerful, because usually the OTK decks would splash in something from other colors in order to be as good as it possibly can. And then obviously Grandis, with the promo getting hit, that basically kneecapped that deck's damage potential. So a deck like Machine Dramon, its win condition being trying to stall out the opponent, creating an unkillable Digimon that they literally can't do anything about, puts them in a unique position to be able to use a card like Ragnarlordmon to be able to set up a secondary body, and then like literally for doing absolutely nothing because the opponent can't do anything to them, and then they just win outright with Ragnarlordmon. So they play this control game until they see Ragnarlordmon, and then they just hit the win button, just because of how the decks function. And we see that kind of similarly with the Greymon decks, just because, again, the change in the format means that they have to lose some of their tools. They can only choose red or black. Red, it looks to be the stronger base, and just because you actually have that protection, it allows you to be able to have this alternative win condition, on top of the fact that red is where the majority of damage is coming from in that style of deck anyway, to be able to have multiple different outs to be able to win the game out of nowhere. So that's where I'm kind of at with win conditions. Like, different decks have different win conditions, and not every deck has the same type of win condition. So, like, Red Hybrids goes for a more chip style approach rather than a big bursty damage, although it still has that potential. That's not the win con. It's to hit hard and fast with your low level bodies that just so happen to be big and gain you lots of resources at the same time. So all of these decks have different win conditions, and the better ones definitely are standing out more based on the other factors. Because I think the win condition, while it's good to have a good win condition, it's better to make sure you have everything else that could back up your win condition.
Yeah, exactly. I agree there, because there you can have a win condition, but if your things that are supporting the win condition are not, they're subpar, unless that win condition is just extremely absurd, that's a different thing altogether. But if the win condition is just like, it's a good, I swing like 2 checks and I'm good there, that's not great. Like, your win condition has to be, I can just use War Greymon for example. My win condition, I get into this level 6, that will, one, control the board every single turn. I can guarantee control whatever it is that you put out on the board, unless it's suspended. But even then, I just swing through it. So I guess I still get the piercing and go through. I have protection, because you have to get rid of either, depending on how good the stack is, multiple forms of protection. And I can go higher if I need to with the Omnimons or War Grey X. And it is such an oppressive, when it's on the board, it makes your opponent have to play a certain way. Those are the win conditions I tend to like more than a lot of other ones, because, like, a good one, because I've been playing this deck quite a bit, Hunters win condition. You have 2 big win conditions. You can get to Arrestor Dramon Superior Mode. That card is insanely strong. Or Quartzmon. Quartzmon is really not necessarily your main win condition, but it is a card that can get you closer to winning. But Superior Mode really makes your opponent, like, hurt, because they have to be like, okay, if I promote this stack, does he have Superior Mode? Can he do anything with Superior Mode? Does he have enough tamers to do so? Like, you really have to be careful when you're playing against Hunters, because of Superior Mode and how easily it can deal with anything in the game, because nothing can protect you from it. So the win condition is so strong. This is just a level 5 as well. A level 5 that can get rid of anything in the game while simultaneously swinging multiple checks, sometimes all of your checks if you have enough of the tamers, jamming, nuke the board with minus DP, and straight up just deleting things. Like, this boss monster does everything. It can be a blocker. It does literally everything in one body. So it's like, that is where you can be like, okay, the win condition is so obscenely absurd that, like, you don't care what the rest of the deck does. You just want to get to him. Just get to Superior Mode. So it's like, in those scenarios, yes, you can just say, screw whatever's happening below. You just need to have him come out, and he'll win you the game more often than not.
And not everything is on the hyper aggressive side, because we do have yellow hybrids and, like, security control as definitely slower decks, and their win condition is usually to either A, stall out the game long enough where the opponent just actually doesn't have the resources to be able to deal with what you're trying to do, or B, literally deck them out because the game went so long and you forced your opponent to draw into so many of their good cards only for you to blow them out with little to minimal effort. And
Yes.
like, that just goes to show that there's multiple different ways to be able to approach a deck's win condition, and how many win conditions your deck can have, because usually you want to have, like, your plan A and then your plan B. And based on what you see and what you get during the game and what your opponent is, you usually want to try to be as flexible as you can, going between plan A and plan B, which some decks do better than others. And I think, like, it's not necessarily power creep. I just think with the styles of deck that we have currently, there's definitely a decent diversity in styles between the top decks that we currently have. But the top decks are just that absurd that they are literally gatekeeping almost everything out just because of everything else that is supporting the top decks outside of their win condition. So speed and consistency, that is definitely another huge, huge, huge part to a deck's overall success. How fast you can get into your win condition and how consistently can you do it are two like very important factors, because if you could have the strongest win condition in the world, like other games have alternate win conditions. I really hope Digimon doesn't get one, but other games have alternate win conditions, and usually alternate win condition type cards fall into the latter where they either suck because they're too hard to get into and they're not consistent and not fast, or B, they are too consistent, are too fast, and make up a large portion of the meta as a result. So speed and consistency is definitely how decks are able to win.
You can argue that's probably the most important part, because it doesn't matter if you have the strongest win condition if you can never get to it.
Right. So, and decks have different forms of speed and consistency. Some people just equate it to draw power. Others, it's just literally the deck itself. So, like, I wouldn't say yellow hybrids, just again, as an example, or security control. They don't have the greatest consistency in terms of like draw power, finding your parts and pieces. What they make up for that is just the parts and pieces that they are running are very impactful when they are seen. And if every single card in their deck is like that, then they don't need to draw as many cards as they humanly possibly can. They just need to make sure that they have something at any given moment that is as powerful as they need it to be. So, like, just because a deck doesn't necessarily have the greatest draw power doesn't mean it's not a good deck.
Yeah, I think that I definitely agree there, because, like, I mean, I love yellow hybrid, and that deck is, at the moment, it's definitely nowhere not consistent. You just don't always see your pieces, but at least the pieces that are like the yellow hybrids, your level sixes, et cetera, et cetera. But the deck, the options that the deck has and the tamers that the deck has are so strong that if they are hit, like from security, or you play them, whatever, and if your opponent plays into them, they swing the game in your favor so heavily, like, so that it ends up not mattering if your deck is consistent or not in certain scenarios, because your card value is so strong. Like when I play Lonke and I have 3 security, that is a massive turn. That is 2 bodies I get to remove instantly, and one of the removal is just instant. I just get rid of it. It doesn't matter what it does, or it has deletion. None of it doesn't matter. So it's like your card value, or at least the card strength to value, is just so absurd that if you do see them in security, like your recovery holy waves and your tactical retreats, or chaos degrades, and all these other cards, whatever you're running with whatever deck you're playing, specifically with these controlled style decks, they're just so obscenely strong that it doesn't matter if your deck can't draw a million cards like the other cards do, because they'll just deal with whatever your opponent is doing out by themselves.
Yeah, so like I equate like when approaching a deck and figuring out its consistency, a lot of people will run searching and drawing cards, and what makes decks like extra good is if that card is just naturally part of your overall game plan. So in certain situations it's not always part of your game plan, but you want to run it basically to act like a pseudo card that you want to see. So it's like the argument, oh, I could run, let's just take Lone K as just an example. I could run 4 Lone Ks, or I could run 2 Lone Ks and 2 draw cards, and I hope I draw into Lone K, or like 2 Lone K and 2 searchers to try to search out the Lone K, or whatever card that you need. So like there is that like slight math where it's just like, okay, if I'm running 4 searchers looking for the specific card that I need and running 4 cards that I need, then that's 8 cards that I potentially have that can see that one specific card. So that just goes into like some of the searching and drawing math of it. And usually the more chances you have to find what you need, usually is going to make your deck perform overall better. Which is why like something like Security Control, they also have cards like a whole bunch of security bombs and a whole bunch of recovery, and that's the majority of what they need. And they seldomly draw just because they're using 1 card per turn versus you using 5, and that's where like the math starts to add up in terms of how a deck like Security Control can still be as good as it is when it doesn't have the highest of consistencies. And it's because it actually does, you just don't acknowledge how it's being consistent. And that's just a huge part to how a lot of decks function. Machine Dramon is one that's kind of like half memed on, where it's just like, okay, the deck doesn't have a designated searcher, so we're going to run Black Mem Boost and some other cards to up the overall consistency, to try to find the parts and pieces that I need while I have the deck space to be able to do that. But it does have some pretty decent draw cards, and it has the ability to run some various other sub packages to be able to figure out how it's going to be seeing its parts and pieces. And I think right now we kind of do just have a slightly more optimized list or lists, just because multiple people have topped with it, but a style that is a more consistent style than what we were running before, just because the tools have slightly changed to allow the deck to be more powerful and more consistent.
Yeah, I think Machine Turbine is probably like one of the best examples of that, where optimization really made it a lot better. Because a lot of the time, like if we look even just like a few months ago, uh, before BT11 came out for us, and we were looking at like the Japan side with the Machine Dramon, they were a lot of the times they were playing red base with the draw Guillemons so that they could just fill their hand with draws, and then having like the X antibody Guillemons to nuke like memory blockers and things like that. So it's like their philosophy of the deck. That's what we were thinking was going to be the best version of it, just because draw power plus ways to remove little guys. But then after getting BT11, a lot of them shifted their head. They were like, well, why would we use that when we could just run black base with the Doru line that gives us memory and a draw at the same time, while simultaneously building a stack that's safe in the back so that we can consistently get into our level 6, which then gets into our even better win condition, Chaos Dramon, and things like further, et cetera, as they keep going up. So it's like, this is where like time gave us more, funny enough, gave us more time as we looked at the cards available to us, what actually was better to use with Machine Dramon. And then we finally, or as the masses, they've all the Machine Dramon for the most part, they have all leaned onto this black-based Dorimon line, because of just that free value that you're going to do anyway by tucking cards under your stack naturally. You might as well continue the free value that you get from tucking the level 5s or whatever machine, in this case, because BT11 tucks any machine or cyborg. So right. It just makes sense. Like, as we got more time to look at the cards available to us, that's where they were like, okay, deck has the problem. We cannot consistency. We don't have good consistency with this deck. How do we fix this problem? Look at all the cards. Well, we've stuck with this draw power. That's been like the Machine Dramon idea forever now. How do we? That isn't consistent enough. What is going to be the most consistent? And then they find unorthodox things. And then we finally find the one card that actually matters or makes sense with the deck. And now here we are.
Yeah, and like certain decks like War Greymon are able to do as well as they are just because literally their low end, they usually run 8 searchers while they're also doing other things, and that's contributing to the compounding factor that like, oh, this deck literally has 12 searchers, like red hybrids, they have 12 searchers or like 12 rookies that are able to help them draw cards and find their parts and pieces. So like the more searching and drawing you have on your lower levels, the better. At least for like a stack deck or a deck that wants to utilize its low levels, just because that's where the majority of your cards are going to be, the better the deck is going to end up performing, just because in those off turns, you could use those types of cards to be able to try to find the parts and pieces you need while still simultaneously supporting your overall game plan and gameplay. Which leads us into the third bullet point, which is protections. So protections in Digimon has become a borderline staple since BT5. BT5, we didn't really have cards with protection, but we adopted this whole cat and mouse, chicken and egg style gameplay where whoever raises first generally would lose first, just because their Digimon didn't have protection and the raising area was your protection. Now we have Digimon with actual protections, and the Digimons that have the better forms of protections are the ones that are, no shocker, doing as well as they are. We see this with currently Machinedramon and the Greymon based decks, where they can't be bounced, they can't be tucked, they can't be DP reduced half the time, options don't work. Like, they just have so many different compounding protections attached to them that it just makes it very, very hard to interact with. And if you're one of those decks that doesn't have the few outs and answers, basically you just auto lose, which is pretty sad. And that's part of the reason why it's keeping certain decks out of the meta, is because they literally don't have any answers against what these decks are doing.
Yeah, I think I'm a little 50-50 with this in particular, because I don't think necessarily your deck needs protection to do good, because there are plenty of decks that just do it, that do good without any protection.
I mean, there's subtle protections, and then there is like obvious protections. So like Gallantmon has the subtle protection of the warp ability. So if you lose your stack, you could use the Biomerge Tamer to be able to rebuild right away, as long as you just have a Guilmon. And then you also have the Guilmon that's a rookie that just so happens can warp into a level 6 Digimon. It's something to be able to keep yourself back into the game as best as you possibly can, while not having like an ability to just shut out what the opponent is doing.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense. I kind of view that more as like alternate win conditions rather than protections. I think that's like, or I would probably more call it fail safes. If they do get over my stack, I have a secondary way to get to my win condition, rather than it saying, oh, this is just my way to protect myself from just losing. Because even doing that, like let's say for the since you used the example of the Galamon, I've played that deck unholy amount, and I think it's fine, but I don't think it's good. Like it's awful, because then you lose the memory setter, and then your guy more often than not, because unless you have the multiple tamers out, if it's early enough in the game, you don't have the other Takado out, and then now you can't even blitz or anything like that. So maybe you clear a level 4 or a lower, but you don't clear anything higher than that, or a weak level 5, I guess, if you have like the extra. No, you can't, because you won't have the extra 1k. So,
but that's just like the point where it's like certain protections or failsafes are better than others, which is why something like Gallantmon isn't doing as well as it could be, just because what it does have isn't good enough. At least compared to some other stuff, because that same type of logic is exactly what Red Hybrids it's doing. Its protection is actually through its tamers. It doesn't have any protection built in at all. It has some annoying stuff with all of its on delete abilities, but the fact that you could just hide your tamer as, like, you could hide your Digimon via your tamer and your hand makes it so that it's very safe and easy to be able to just do whatever you feel like you need to do or can do at any given moment. And the opponent can't really stop or interact with you just because Tamers is a very hard to interact with type of card, which is why
It's
in BT7, Hybrids was like everywhere. It was the meta because of the fact that they had this specific tool in their toolbox that most decks literally had zero answers for.
yeah, I see your point there, and that does make sense, and it definitely tracks because I guess I just don't view those necessarily as protection. I more so think of them as just alternative ways to play. I would say, or I guess alternative win conditions in this particular scenario, since we're using these terms. Um, and for the example of red hybrid, they don't have any protection whatsoever, and even their tamers don't technically have protection. They're just a lot harder to deal with because there's not widespread tamer removal. But there are easy ways to deal with said things. But some decks just don't even deal with their deletion effects. They just bounce them or bottom deck them, or et cetera, et cetera. And it's very interesting. I like this a lot because there's quite a bit now that I'm thinking about
Yeah, like all of the
where.
top decks have some form of like failsafe, protection, ability to make the opponent unable to react or respond to what you are doing. We've seen this with Beelzemon, where you just fill up your
Mhm.
trash to 20, have an Itmon out, and then you just kind of win the game from there. We see this right now in Ultimate Cup with Machine Dramon. There actually is like almost zero answers in the entire format for what Machine Dramon can do once he's built up into a big stack. It's literally Lone K or bust.
Yeah, you literally just auto lose if he does get into chaos or
Right, and
above.
then you have Ulforce with Evade. You had Melga with Battle Protections, which is why it was doing so good in its current meta because there wasn't a lot of like actual security threats and effects that were deleting Digimon outright. A lot of it was through battle, and the fact that it could survive that made it so much better than what it actually was. Because right now, even with the multi-attacking, sure, I could get past a blocker, eat some of the damage, and then I'm nerfing myself because of that. Whereas before, without like the ways to stop it, it just went sideways, and then you just couldn't deal with it because you couldn't attack into it to get rid of the body, which was the go-to method at the time. So that it kind of just shows like the better form of protection you have for the meta or way to stop the opponent from interacting with you and your game plan, the better your deck is going to be.
I also just think decks that just overall bypass whatever your opponent is doing tends to be tend to do better. I mean, Beelzemon does that. They don't care what you're doing. They don't care. They will deal with your stuff just by passively doing what they do, and then they'll kill you just because they can chip a little bit, and then they're passively while they're chipping, they're passively getting stuff in the trash to then get their win condition to win, and they don't necessarily have to deal with what is on the board or what you're setting up. So it's like decks that tend to just say, I don't care what you're doing, I'm just going to swing or go mindless and kill you, or at least their win conditions don't cannot be interfered with. Those decks tend to do, or what we would close to get to what we call tier zero, i.e., blue hybrid, things like that, where they're just their win condition was just swing with a bunch of little guys that simultaneously made you unable to play. Like they didn't care what you were doing; it didn't matter what you did because if you put things out that they could interact with, you were just losing. So, like, I think that's where we lean into the decks when they get unhealthy, where they can just mindlessly bypass everything in the game.
Yeah, because I was gonna put removal as like a bullet point because if your deck has the ability to like remove the opponent's threats, then like that also is a contributing factor. But I ultimately didn't because I think that just plays into like a lot of these other points on being able to respond to the opponent or just be on tempo or outpace them. So that's partially why I left that off, because initially I thought like, oh, the better your removal, the better your deck is going to be. But that's not exactly true. As we've seen with a whole bunch of other decks like Rookie Rush, their
Right.
removal was complete, but they just outsped you. And
Like
that
Galamon's
so
removal is crazy, but that deck
yes,
sucks. I was like,
exactly. So like you literally have decks that have represented both ends of the spectrum where removal it does matter and it does help, but it's not the ultimate deciding factor on if the deck is going to be good or not. Because that plays into the next bullet point, which is matchups. So, like all of these, like the 3 points that we were talking about before, the win con, the speed, the protections and interactability, they're all great and dandy, but if your matchups are really poor for the current meta, none of that actually really matters. So like, uh, playing like this big OTK deck into Machine Dramon is like usually the worst thing you could possibly do, or a deck that just has no way to actually deal with Machine Dramon, like Red Hybrids. That's literally one of their worst matchups, because if they see a Machine Dramon and the opponent gets into a Machine Dramon with an analog man or two, you literally can't win the game. It is that bad. So, like, that's why Red Hybrids isn't performing as well as it is, because when it does see its bad matchups, it just actually can't win. Or it has a very hard time of winning. So you could basically just chalk this up to like opponent RNG on who my opponent is, where the game could literally be decided the second I see whatever egg that is, or if they just slam their big body. I do think like people in events need to understand when they have lost the game and call it quits just to save time, but that's a completely different argument. For a
yeah,
different time, and like just understanding what your deck's matchups are for the given meta definitely will help give you an edge in understanding how well your deck is positioned for this meta. As going back to the Melga example, Melga right now is not doing super good, because of the nerfs and limitations, but even before the nerfs and limitations going into like BT11, it wasn't doing so good just because more bad matchups were introduced that people were playing. So the more people play it, the more worse the deck is going to perform, because it's having a more likelihood of seeing its bad matchups, and now it's not doing so well because more people are playing the decks that can beat it. And that's kind of like where the rock paper scissors kind of like triangle starts to try to form. And what makes the rock, the paper, and the scissors is going to change per meta depending on what actually is going to get played and how good its matchups are. Which is why when we had that matchup chart from Core, yeah, it was from Core, for the first North American regionals, we saw like how the meta and matchup spread was, and what was doing good because of what was being played.
yeah. You're right there. That makes sense. Oh, interesting. I'm gonna look at that real quick.
Because D Reapers, just as an example, theoretically is a deck, just the style of deck it is, given enough time, it should be able to win the game when it is able to pull its combo off. It's a literal ticking time bomb. But if you're unable to get to that time bomb explosion, none
It
of
doesn't
what you
matter.
did mattered, which is
Yeah,
why it started falling off the meta, is because decks were able to respond and be able to beat out its bomb when it exploded, or B, beat it before the bomb could explode, and then nothing else mattered to begin with, just because it was this weird anomaly of a deck. But at the time when it first came out, the meta was so I don't want to say like in an infantile state for it, but it was early in its development where it had some pretty decent matchup spreads, because nothing else could really outpace it or deal with the big bomb when it came out. Now we do have those answers, so now it's just falling out of the meta because of that. Now, if it does get more tech and tools to support it, not saying it will, but we've seen decks come in and out of the meta based on matchup spread. Grandis is a perfect example of that. It was god awful in BT10 and part of BT9. But come BT11, when it had a deck that was really popular being played, it had a good matchup spread, so it started doing better and it started winning.
interesting. have to relook at some of that like old data, which because that does track. Because D Reaper, I remember when that came out, and it was just everybody was on that, like, oh, D Reaper stuff. The
Right,
next
and for
zero zero.
Ultimate Cup, it's not that bad just because the damage output on a lot of the decks is significantly lower. They're like, if you're literally not playing red, there's a reasonable expectation that the opponent isn't going to have a whole lot of ways to just burst through your security out of nowhere. Um, so
Yeah,
it
right.
allows you to be able to have that time to be able to form that ticking time bomb, which is the only reason why I'm bringing up D Reapers, because it did top in the Ultimate Cup, partially because of its matchup spread and just the changes to the format, allowing it to actually be playable again in some capacity.
Interesting. I mean, that does make sense. A lot of the decks right now, at least in Ultimate Cup format, they're not like their damage output definitely isn't up there unless you're playing like Bloom or something. Um, and well, I guess Red Hybrid as well, because they can absolutely go crazy when they want to. Um, but
Yeah,
the rest of them kind
Bloom
of
is
just chip and hurt you down, like get you lower, and then they try and explode and kill you in the last like two checks, two
yeah,
to three checks, rather than just OTK unless you're All Force and you got the God Hand.
Bloom
But
using Quartzmon, especially in Ultimate Cup, is another really good example of this. Like, if you run into an All Force player and they do not have an option to be able to bounce your Quartzmon when you go
you've
into it,
won.
you automatically win the game. Like, it is actually that bad. Where if they do not have the answer to the Quartz, they auto lose, and it doesn't even matter when you Quartz. As long as you Quartz, they will lose the game. It is astonishingly hilarious how bad of a matchup that is more specifically. And that's kind of going into like the rock paper scissors again, just because like there are decks that are able to deal with it, and then there's the decks that aren't able to deal with it. And again, that goes into like literally like you could kind of start to see from this type of example like how everything is like feeding into one each other, like with the win con, the consistency, and the and the protections, because none of the protections matter for All Force versus Bloomlord, because Bloomlord just suspends everything and then just starts swinging into security, and it bypasses evade, it bypasses literally everything. So
Yeah.
like it's just another good example on how your matchup spread in the current format can help determine how good your deck actually is, for that environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's always been a case in most TCGs. If your matchup, the decks that'll end up being the best are the decks that can more often than not win against any matchup, or at least have a back and forth with the decks rather than just a outright loss. But for the most part, there is usually a hard counter to most decks. Um, Excluding, of course, there's outliers where they don't necessarily will care what you do, like Beelzemon. I think there wasn't really a counter to that deck besides just outpacing it, but that's not necessarily a counter. It's more of a check, um, because you can't stop it from doing what it's going to do.
Yeah. And a deck like Beelzemon will lead us into our next bullet point, just to keep things moving, which is going to be flavor, style, and overall popularity, which feeds into the last bullet point, which is accessibility, because like they kind of do coincide.
That's true.
Beelzemon is like the perfect example because you literally buy one starter deck, buy the few singles that the starter deck didn't come with, or just buy a second starter deck, and then get a couple of singles outside of that, and you have like for under $100 probably the strongest deck competitively at that time. It was astonishingly crazy how good that deck was and how cheap that deck was. I mean, granted, the EX2s were expensive when the deck came out because we knew how good it was going to be and we knew that card was needed. But outside of that card, the deck was fairly cheap, and we see that right now with a lot of other decks being extremely cheap. Hunters being accessible, Cross Hearts being accessible, Red Hybrids being fairly accessible. Like, there's just a lot of these decently accessible decks that people also just happen to love the pieces out of. Some people, Cross Hearts was their first foray with that season of the anime, introducing them to those characters, and they fell in love with it, and they love the mechanic. It could be whatever they fell in love with about the deck. And the fact that Bandai just made it easy to get and it was good, just it was the icings on the cake.
Yeah, I think that's what ends up being what you would, I guess, put in the terms of accessibility. How, but I guess it also comes with familiarity too, because like this is way down in the future, of course. I think in October for us, we get the new starter deck 16 and starter deck 15 with the new Greymon and the new Garurumon stuff,
Right.
and that's like, I mean, you see those two, you see War Greymon, you see Metal Guru, that automatically bleeds into a lot of people's nostalgia, and they're like, oh wow, I know that guy, I like that card. That gets people to buy the product, and they see that ends up being, it's also a really good deck, by the way. The War Greymon and that with that starter deck stuff is really strong. So it's like, it's, if your deck, I guess the stuff that you see is also good while simultaneously it being recognizable, like War Greymon, those decks like that, Beelzemon. Like a lot of people remember Beelzemon from the Tamers and his redemption arc and all that other stuff with the anime. So it was like, it was those decks, not all the time, because the Galamon starter deck's bad. Like it's just bad.
I
There's
actually
some
think
good cards.
yes,
But
it has some good cards, and at the time, it was actually one of the better starter decks. Beelzemon has an unfair advantage because it was an advanced deck, so it was designed to be more competitive.
so I guess you can't necessarily call it a starter deck because it's not what it's actually called, the product name wise. But it's supposed to be like a newer player's entry point into competitive. That was the marketing for it. It's like, oh, you want to get into competitive while playing Digimon? Here, we can get you with this advanced starter deck, or it's called the advanced deck, Beelzemon advanced deck set. But that's was the intention, was to get newer player to look at this, be like, okay, is this good? I can use this out the gate, go into a local and not get completely stomped out, assuming that I know how to play and I can do my sequencing and things like that. That was the intention of that advanced deck. And then, of course, the extra goodies and stuff like that, while simultaneously presenting Beelzemon as another new cards and things like that. So that marketing for that deck was insane. It was very good. It was definitely like peak product, one of the best products we've ever received. Like, because geez, man, the stuff you got from it. I mean, I have all of it right here. Literally all the promos that you got, the alternate arts. It was beautiful, and then the chase card as well. So it's like, how accessible were the cards that were there? I mean, that's as accessible as you can possibly get, because you just buy these two and then you're golden. You're ready to go with any deck. So
And
how do you?
yeah, and sorry to cut you off, but
No, you're good.
Bandai's like set design has actually been getting better in terms of trying to up the overall accessibility to be able to play the game. So one of the big complaints that they probably received, I'm not going to say for sure because I don't know, but it was definitely a sentiment echoed in the community, and I definitely pointed them out on it early on, how bad their set design was. And they definitely got a lot better. Like, if you look at, I think it was like literally starting with EX2. EX2 gave you D Reapers to play pretty much out of cards exclusively from the set. Like, you don't have to invest in anything other than EX2 if you wanted to play D Reapers. Granted, you could get some other cards outside of the set to try to enhance the deck, but there was at least something playable there. They did that again with BT10, introducing us into Block 2. BT10 was another set where if you wanted to play Cross Hearts, there's that accessibility factor. You only need to invest in that set. They did that again with BT12. with Hunters. Hunters is another one. EX4 is going to have two of them. You probably would need to subsidize a little bit for the Omnimon deck, and probably the Dark Knight deck, or
Yeah, you
not
need a
Dark
few
Knight,
cards here and
Grey
there, but
Knights. Yeah. But like for the most part, you could build the vast majority of the deck inside of that set. Alliance, you could build 100% out of that set. You don't need to invest in anything else if you really didn't want to. Then BT 13 has Royal Knights, just as another one. So they are trying to make it easier to have entry points into the game with all of these different sets that have decks that you can make almost exclusively from it. And based on their block design, they also are going to be supporting some of these decks where it's just like Blue Flares. It might not have gotten everything it needed, but it slowly does with all of the updates. So it seems like at the start of the block is when they go heavy into the founding decks for the environment, and then it'll just slowly get some support throughout the rest of the block until they feel like they don't want to support it anymore and they want to support some other stuff just because it could have had enough support. We see this right now with, at least over in Japan, they are entering block 3 with all of the ace cards, and BT 14 is also going to have, like, the decks in there is going to be supported by BT 15. So they have a track record on being supportive towards the decks that are more recent, so that way they can keep them recent because people want to keep playing those decks.
I like that you bring up I mean, you brought it up earlier, but I like that you bring up Crossheart, because that's a deck that, like, I mean, if I just go by my locals, there was a lot of people that had no idea what any of those Digimon were. They've never seen that anime or anything like that, but then they found a way to bring the deck into, or bring the Digimon, I should say, into the game, and really give it its own personality when you're playing the deck. So, and now a lot of people love those decks, me included. I do love it, but I've also seen the anime Cross Wars and all that other stuff. So, I was not. I mean, that target demographic was definitely me there, but seeing a lot of people hit it up and like, oh wow, this is super cool. I really like the way these Digimon interact with each other and how they how they look and things like that. Because I personally think they look cool, but that's just me. But it that is definitely something where the deck was just very accessible, because all the cards are just commons, and then there's like, back then you had to use X5 and more X5s, I should say, and things like that to supplement your boss monster, but you didn't really need X5 only as your only boss monster, because you had X4. Well, back in JP they had X4, but we didn't have X4 for a long time, so we had to lean on X5 really heavily. But it even with that, it was still a solid deck to play. It was still good, and you could do well with it. And it was a simple deck to play, so it's very, very accessible to a new player. If they just were like, "Hey, let me give you my Crossheart deck," very simple. The deck is, you have to get a tamer out. The Digimon, when they die, place them under the thing. So it's like decks that tend to be accessible. I guess I would say decks that are easier to play, because not that this game is really all that complicated. There's this game really isn't that hard to play.
I don't know.
Um,
Purple players love to torture themselves every now and
yeah,
then.
that's just a lot of sequencing. I don't really think those are the most overly complex decks to play, but you do need to. The decision making has to be good when it comes to that. I think is more so the hardest part of those decks, rather than them being extremely hard to play per se, because you just have to make good decisions at the right times, and that's definitely a hard skill to do when you're in those like tournament settings, and you're getting like, you got the tournament jitters and things like that. You're nervous, you're, maybe it's your first tournament, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very interesting. I like the decks you bring up, and how Bandai's gotten a lot more fluid when it comes to that. The set design, making sure that when they do release a set, either there's one or two decks that you can just build out the gate, so it gives more value to the set, so that you're not just like, for example, we have this set, we have Shine Gray, where there's just a line, but it's an inoptimal line. You can't even really play the deck competitively just because it just doesn't function. It's not there yet. So we have half of it, and then we have to wait 3 sets or a side set and another set until the deck is actually playable and it's actually good. So it's like those, I don't know. I mean, they do that all the time, and that's just so that they give longevity to the cards and give you something to look forward to when they do get upgrades. But I don't know. I don't like when that happens, because then you're just like, well, I
I
have to
mean,
wait.
it's just a common TCG marketing thing. You start
Yeah,
something in one set, you finish it in the other. Now players are going to have to invest in two different sets in order to
of
be
course.
able to complete something. Or Shine Greymon's another good example, because we do have some stuff that we could play. It's based on some of the older stuff. It's just not that good compared to where we currently are in the game. So you could play it in a couple of different fashions just to have something playable while it's stuck in the waiting room for the next wave of support. And then that kind of helps keep player interest a little bit. But one of the other things that adds to a deck's overall like popularity, and like one of the last big talking points before we start wrapping things up, is the mechanics. Some people just fall in love mechanically with the deck, and they don't care what the imagery or theming is. So going back to Beelzemon, a lot of people may have come from different games. A lot of different games have grave-based mechanics, and like Magic has Dredge, and Yu-Gi-Oh had Lightsworns. So people are just like, oh, it gives them a familiar point to be able to say, this is your Lightsworn deck, this is your Dredge deck. If you like those types of decks, you would like Beelzemon. So some people attached to mechanics on what they enjoy. I specifically attach to unsuspending. I don't know why I like unsuspending cards. It might be because I like to put them sideways again, but that's neither here nor there.
Fun, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. It's just good fun times. And then it creates like some really interesting like extra dynamics. Like that's why I like unsuspending. But that's generally sometimes the decks that I will lean towards as somebody who likes a particular mechanic. And like we all have our different flavors that we generally enjoy. And that's the decks that we generally gravitate towards. And the meta, as far as like how Bandai has been designing their sets, and like, so they obviously are working multiple sets in ahead. This shouldn't be any shock or news to anyone who's new to TCGs. Usually when they're designing a set, they're working at least 3, maybe 4 sets ahead. Yes, mistakes still happen. That's just designer oversight. Again, that's just a normal thing that happens, unfortunately. But it seems like Bandai is designing, when it comes to the meta and how they want to approach where the power is, they want to kind of do like a little bit of a waterfall. So usually the new set will come out. They want to try to push it to obviously push sales, but to try to make it as exciting as they possibly can. So those cards are usually going to try to be some of the stronger or better cards for the next environment. Then the next set will come out. It'll have, again, more exciting and newer stuff. That's supposedly going to try to keep in check some of the stuff that they just created in the last set, while simultaneously support it. So it's still there, just not as dominant. And then as sets progress, it should fall in the tier listing until it just is basically phased out. Sometimes the waterfall works really, really well, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. And we get Melga topping for 3 sets. We get Blue Flare, or not Blue Flare, Blue Hybrids topping for 3 sets. And usually that's when Bandai takes a look and is just like, okay, we either have to create a counter specifically for this so we can actually start selling things and moving things forward, or we're just going to have to take out the ban hammer and start nerfing things. So that's just how they kind of seem to be taking their approach to the meta in terms of like as a company standpoint, just as an observer of the game and noticing the trends that they have been laying out.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I gotta do more research on that because that's such an interesting thing to think about. Because they are working in advance because that's just how these TCGs work. They're not gonna just release a set. Wait a second. All right, now we gotta work on a set. No, it's they're working very much in advance. The
Because I honestly think Black War Greymon was designed to just absolutely hose on Melga. And that came out in BT 11 when Melga was still dominating in BT 10. So they probably knew that Melga would be pretty good. It doesn't hose just specifically on Melga, anything that can unsuspend. And like we didn't really have like super strong defensive decks. So there was like multiple reasons why Black War Greymon X was probably designed the way that he was. But it just shows the waterfall.
Yeah, I think I agree there. It shows that they all it takes is that one mess up, and then you get blue hybrid, and then things like that escalate, and cards that should not have stayed in the format do stay for much longer than they intended to. Then they have to hit the ban hammer. But for the most part, I mean, we haven't had that too often. That's really only a few decks here and there, and as we've seen, they've gotten all. I think every single one of them so far have gotten hit. So
Literally.
I don't. And then we have the outliers that, like Crossheart, where we only had it for a week, and then it got.
Well, with blue
hit.
hybrids, we as a community unanimously agreed that like we're just ready to move past it, and we didn't really want to play it. And then we slowly learned, oh, blue hybrids is actually still the best deck. I guess we should go back to it.
Yeah.
So like we had a little bit of a break, but that was more because of us as a community deciding not to play it. And that's what could have happened in the UK regional, where not a single Beelzemon topped, was because maybe they, some players who normally would have been on it, decided to take a step back and try or play something else. Granted, it was still the third most represented deck in that event, but I digress. It doesn't mean that the deck isn't any less powerful. Like, it all just is a lot of compounding factors, which is kind of like showing like the whole exercise that we're laying out is to kind of just show it's not just one specific thing. There's usually multiple different factors going into how good a deck is, how it's able to top, and how it's still able to top, and what other decks are allowed to top because of it. Because usually we'll have like one center boogeyman deck, and then the meta starts forming and warping around what that is, and that'll change every format in every set. At least hopefully it should. So that way the game stays as fresh and interesting as it is. And if this is a meta that you're not exactly quite enjoying, then feel free to take a break and come back when something has changed, so that way you can come in to something a little bit different, and then the game feels fresh again, and you can be excited just like we are. But I believe that's all the time that we have. I know this was a little bit longer of an episode than we normally do. So I want to take this time to thank everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please help support the podcast by sharing it with others on various social media platforms. Leave us a rating and review. Leave us a follow or subscription, depending on your platform of choice. And thanks again, and I will see you in the next episode.